This is
No Filter.
So we're here at last, No Filter, with the bona fide legend, Nitin Sawhney. And when I say legend, that term's totally destroyed by millennial culture. It's totally overused, possibly by me more than anyone else on this show. But we really are in the presence of a legend tonight. Nitin, welcome to the show. And I totally know you're feeling really uncomfortable already.
Why?
Because I keep calling you a legend and you're not very good at taking compliments.
I'm really loving it, yeah.
Oh, have you grown to love the compliments?
It's kind of, you know what, it's kind of like, but I know you say it, which is very kind of you. Thank you.
Well, the reason I say it, Nitin, and I think, it's because of our little personal link and the fact that we're greying old men about to crumble into massive old age. When I see what you've done and actually compare that with the promise that you were showing us in the mid to late 90s, and then when I see how much more you've done, I mean, I'm talking A.R. Rahman levels of achievement and possibly even beyond that. I do think that you truly are one of the greatest British Asian legends there are within the realm of music.
No, I'm uncomfortable, yeah. Thank you very much. Yes.
Before we do anything else, Nitin, how are you feeling tonight? How are you feeling in November 2019?
I'm all right. I've been travelling a lot. I've just been in Australia and Portugal in the last couple of weeks. So I'm just been playing over there. So yeah, a little bit tired, but I'm all right.
And like here now, I don't know if you're going to do a live gig. I don't know if you're going to replay an album in the Royal Albert Hall. I don't know which film you're going to work on, which score you're going to compose. When it comes to this travelling, is it just straight up gigs, or are you also?
It's been straight up gigs in Australia. That was amazing. And then we've been revisiting Beyond Skin, which is the 20th anniversary of that. So it's been really interesting going around playing that album in different places, and it was great doing the Royal Albert Hall. Yeah, it's really cool.
You know what really hit me about the online response to the Royal Albert Hall gig was just how many people the gig touched emotionally. I mean, I get the album's emotional. It's one of your powers, empathy through music, I think. But the responses online were full of tears and full of melancholy and full of, I had a life-changing, transient moment tonight. Are you kind of aware that happened at the Royal Albert Hall gig?
Well, I saw it a lot on Twitter. It was insane. I couldn't stop it coming. It was really incredible. I felt quite humbled by that response. It was like a tsunami of incredible emotion, and it's great when you get a spontaneous. You DJ, and when people really give you that appreciation spontaneously, but also seeing it in writing after the event and seeing so many people expressing deep feelings and catharsis. It was I found it amazing.
And were you aware as the gig was going on that this was going to be one of your standout gigs of your career, which I assume you think it is now?
I think it is now, but I think at the time you just in the moment and enjoying that, and I think that's what I always want to be, is just enjoying everything that happens and feeling it as it comes.
All right, so let's get down to basics. All right, let's talk about first 2019 and your existential feelings about what's going on planet Earth. Then I don't want to sound like like your psychologist, but then we'll work slowly backwards to your early years. All right. You're someone who's always talking about what's happening politically and culturally, and it's a cliche now. We're living in mad times. How is the political and social side of Nitin surviving 2019?
It's a very good question, because I think I don't know if other people feel this way, but there's a lot about what's happening in the political world right now that's triggering, that triggers feelings from when I was young, triggers a lot of resentment, anger, frustration, feeling like you're still not heard, you're still not valued. I mean, I've only ever had, and I've said this many times, I've only ever had one principle, which is that every human being is born of equal value. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you are. What you do in your life might change that, and some people it does change that. But I kind of, all I want to do, all I've ever tried to do is pursue that idea. And And that happens through my music, that happens through my thinking, whatever I'm doing or however I'm engaging with other people, that is the overriding principle. So it's interesting because just having that principle shouldn't be a political position, but because the world has become so extreme, so politicized, so charged in so many ways by a lot of, I suppose, a lot of disinformation and manipulation and exploitation. Because of all of that going on, I guess, just having simple beliefs like that feel politicized.
Can I just quickly pick up on the triggering? Because I just want to tell you a bit about how that relates to me.
Sure.
So we're of the same age. I spent quite a bit of my youth being the only Asian kid in school and was beaten and all that stuff. But you know what's really mad? It's only now I'm realizing how many of us went through that. I used to think that I was unlucky. I now realize, no, an entire generation went through that and then buried it. So when you talk about triggering, I just want you to know that it's people like you over the last year, you've not been good for my mental health. All right?
Sorry about that.
Because I buried it so much and then put on layer and layer of, first came the Asian Underground, then I was on Radio 1 and I love this music and I don't care about this stuff and I care about the people who are affected by it, but I'm stronger than that. And what I'm realizing now is I'm about to, over the next 10 years, psychologically vomit stuff that I've buried for years.
Yeah.
So tell me what you mean. I know what you mean by being triggered and I'm getting triggered. What do you mean for someone who's British Asian who hasn't gone through that? What's triggering about 2019?
So when you kind of, when I grew up, I grew up in a school where, the outside our school gates, we'd have the National Front, which was an extreme right-wing party, very white supremacist party, leafleting outside the school gates, making Asian people who came out of there weren't many Asian, but there was me and maybe one or two others out of 700 kids, but basically making us feel that we were kind of inferior. I was followed home by a guy with a loud hailer in a white van, just shouting out abuse at me the whole way home. I was attacked quite regularly. So I mean all those things. But the thing is that you kind of get past it as you get older. And I was in bands and I was got into sport and I was doing all kinds of things and it got buried, as you said, over time, went to university, did all kinds of things. But then it kind of resurfaces when you see certain people, certain figures who have become now very powerful and very influential in the political world or in in our everyday lives that we see in the media, that we see in the press, constantly getting approbation and getting empowered by the political climate that is out there. And it's almost as if suddenly we've reversed a lot of stuff that had been undone. What I felt, during, as you talked about, what some people call the Asian Underground. I was never comfortable with that term, but Asian Underground, there were a lot of Asian bands that were around in the 90s that were making music and expressing what they felt. And for me, I was always trying to find a voice, as a person who was of Asian heritage in this country, in this context. So I guess, my sense of triggering is related to the fact that I thought we'd come through all of that. We'd kind of, enlightened ourselves in a way as a nation to the idea that we were a pluralistic society, that we were not just multicultural, because you could have apartheid and still be multicultural, but you have to have equal opportunity, anti-racism, multiculturalism coexisting. And so I kind of felt like that's what we were. We were in an enlightened age. And then when you hear some of the rubbish that led up to the referendum, that led up to Brexit, that's leading up to Brexit, that certain people that you kind of find abhorrent in their views or in the things that they express, when you find that society has empowered them, it's frustrating. And it's not just here, it's on both sides of the Atlantic, and not just of the Atlantic, across the world. And I do feel like it's really weird because the idea, like I said, that simple concept that I was expressing at the beginning, where I just said, I believe that every human being is of equal value. They're born of equal value. That idea seems to be anathema for so many people, or a real problem for a lot of people, and that's frustrating, and that is triggering.
I'd really like to talk to you, and we'll move on to this, about technology's role in all of this, because
Sure.
I love technology, and I think
Me too.
we have to bring that in. But before we do that, I was having a conversation with in quotation marks, a millennial a couple of months ago, and I was talking about what I'd been through. As I say, I've only been triggered recently. I'd buried it, and I've started remembering. Oh, that happened, and that happened. Oh, and then that person did this to me, and then I actually got headbutted here, and I can't believe I used to get called. All this stuff's coming out. And what they said to me was, "Do you suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Is there an argument that our generation, unlike our parents' generation, not that I'm saying we had it worse, unlike generations that came after us, because we were the second generation, whatever you want to call it, is there an argument that we collectively are still suffering and are yet to experience the post-traumatic stress disorder of being British Asian in the 70s and 80s?"
Funnily enough, I was formally diagnosed with PTSD a few years ago, but it was after my dad died, and I believed that it was related to my dad. So I was referred to a few people. I actually went to psychiatrists who in the end said you should actually see a clinical psychologist. So I started seeing a psychologist, and actually what emerged was that the issue wasn't so much with what I felt about my dad, but stuff that happened to me as a kid. So then what was interesting about all of that was, as I went through talking about that with my psychologist, my psychotherapist, who I've been seeing for a very long time now, I kind of realized that there's a lot of stuff where, like what you were talking about, the kind of racism, the kind of stuff that happens to Asians in certain places if you're isolated. What I realized was that I hated that kid, which I didn't actually realize, because she actually at one point said, "What do you feel about that 11-year-old boy when you're looking at him now?" And I was really surprised by my answer. I said, I feel he's pathetic.
Oh, God.
And she said, "Why'd you say that?" I said, "Because he's weak. I can't deal with that." And she said, "Well, do you not want to protect him?" I said, "I protect other people, but I feel he's pathetic." So it was quite interesting, because the whole thing was actually about reconciling. And, when I made Beyond Skin, a lot of that was, I didn't realize at the time, because you recognize it years later, but you realize that you're going through some kind of self-therapy kind of, thing. And I guess my albums are always that. I mean, I always say, like, each album I make is like a diary entry, and I'm talking about feelings and thoughts and whatever you're going through. And I think a lot of people just bury stuff because they feel it's too weak to admit to emotions,
Yeah.
they're too weak to admit to vulnerability, too weak to and I was one of those people. I thought, that's not cool. It's not
Yeah.
it's not a good, and so I buried that person in my head. And the person I always looked at was the kind of, the strong kind of person that I became. I got into kickboxing, I got into martial arts, I got into lots of other things afterwards. And that's the person I choose to kind of, over the years, I chose to kind of think, okay, that person I can relate to. It's interesting. All that. There you go.
Sorry, I think I might be feeling a bit emotional, and the reason why is because, I mean, the hairs have definitely stood up on the back of my neck. It's because I've never even thought about the 11-year-old version of me, and you saying that you thought he was pathetic. I think I possibly might.
Not you, not the 11-year-old version of you, but of me. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Hey, listen, my 11-year-old version of me is going to meet your 11, and we're going to have a fight, mate. No, God, I think I might personally need to also go through this, because I don't know I've never even done this. And the mad thing about all of that is I've always seen myself as being really kind of metrosexual, full of empathy, a really out there kind of person. And it's only recently I've realized I created you when I was 15. So I haven't even began to start thinking about young Bobby yet. So I think that's why I felt like a small punch in the stomach when you started talking about the 11-year-old version of you. All right, hold on. I need to play some music and just reset for a while, if that's all right.
Yeah, cool.
I thought we'd play Fires from the session you did, which was, I think, 2015. Yeah, it was November 2015.
Yeah.
Do you remember coming here to do this?
Yeah, of course I do. Yeah, it's great. Thanks, man.
Do you want to quickly tell people what Fires is all about, if you can?
Oh, wow. What, from Dystopian Dream?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wow. It's kind of, well, I won't go into it in too much detail, but it's kind of, it's about what was going on at the time in terms of bombs and so on. But it's kind of, it's frustration with the political systems that allow that to happen. It's just simply that.
This is No Filter.
Fires, Nitin Sawhney, and people he's still working with now, people he's worked with for 20 years. Arif, you've always worked with, obviously.
For nearly 30 years now. Wow. Long time.
Now, not to, criticise you for your appearance, but you look your age and so do I. How come Arif still looks 21?
No, he doesn't look 21.
Well, I think it's just because he hasn't got a mop of grey hair, or maybe I missed it last time around. But yeah, no, you're right. Actually, he has got some lines on his face that do point to a life,
one or two, yeah,
a life well lived. Okay, so if you don't mind, and you can push this aside. You talked about your father passing away.
Yeah.
Are you ready to talk a bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it, yeah.
The reason I say it is, once again, we live our lives through other people who we connect with. I feel an affinity with you. And even though you didn't say much, the bits that you did say about losing a parent and that generation, because when your father did pass away, you did a lot of stuff on social media about that generation and just how glorious they were and how amazing they were. So I kind of locked into that and learned from it. In terms of your father going, what did it teach you about what I call the golden generation, the first wave of immigrants who came to this country?
Well, I mean, the first of all, I'd separate out the two. I mean, like in terms of my dad passing away, that's one thing which I'll talk about in a minute if you want. But what happened was that, I mean, again, you would talk about the Royal Albert Hall, and I was playing his voice, because his voice is actually on, he passed away in 2013, but I interviewed him for my album for Beyond Skin in the late 90s, and I was talking to him about his experiences of when he first came over as an immigrant to this country, and you hear him saying, "Oh, they showed us pictures of Kew Gardens. It was all beautiful," and he talks about that. And then there's a track that I wrote called "The Immigrant," which is a celebration of his journey, of my parents' journey, and their sacrifices and all the rest of it to come over here, and it's honouring them. But what was really strange was playing his voice out at the Royal Albert Hall with my mum there. And she's actually in a box, at the Royal Albert Hall, and it's very powerful because we sold out the Royal Albert Hall. We've got an amazing audience there, and my mum is up there listening to my dad's voice resounding across the whole of the place from the album. And before we played it,
did you talk to your mum after the gig?
I did, before and after, yeah. And it's like I was hearing that she was shaking when she was hearing his voice, because you imagine, I mean, she hadn't really heard his voice very much, but I think at the same time there's something again quite cathartic about hearing him and his optimism. They were an incredibly optimistic generation. I mean, my dad really wanted me to take. So you know the story that I was offered an OBE years ago in I think 2005 or something, and
your politics went no.
Yeah, I didn't want the word empire after my name, and I said no, I couldn't take it. Then my dad had said to me, I'd really like you to take it at least for my birthday. And I said, I just can't do it. Now, the thing that really got to me was that he passed away a few years later, and he'd expressed that he was sad that I never took it. So last year, on my dad's birthday, I got sent a letter offering me a CBE. And,
did you know you were going to get the letter on your dad's birthday?
No.
So that's the universe literally.
Just came on my dad's birthday. So I thought, okay, I've got to take it. So the
I
thing
don't
is,
know if you believe in the afterlife, but I'm telling you right now, he was pulling some serious strings for
it's
that.
a big sign. I mean, I believe in signs like that. So, but it's weird because I don't believe in the word empire for me just conjures up Darth Vader, so I don't really get it. But I kind of, I took it, and then the actual, the ceremony came on my dad's anniversary with my mum, wedding anniversary.
God.
On the 9th of May. So I went then. So it's kind of, but that was very charged for me because there was this whole thing about my dad, and for me it's quite interesting that I had an issue with the concept of empire, but my dad had lived through that. My mum and dad had lived through that, and there he was saying, look, we're proud, look at how far we've come, in this country, and I'm proud, of that acceptance, of that kind of sense that we've actually, we can be honoured now as people like anyone else. And my issue is still, and it still continues to be, the word empire. I don't feel at all comfortable with, and I don't use that title, But I took it for my dad, and I kind of, and I'm proud that I did because I think it's honouring him and his journey with my mum.
Wow. Can I ask you a question about your
Sure.
dad and empire? And that is, totally get what you're saying about empire. I think, the majority of people of colour in this country from places that were colonised by Britain, no matter how much they love modern day Britain, they will have problems with empire. Are you saying your dad had a problem but then wanted to flip that problem and that's why he wanted you to take that honour? Or are you saying, like some other people of his generation, he'd never had a problem because that's just that generation?
No, he was very aware, and so with my mum as well, they talked a lot about that time. But I think, the first thing that you said, I think it was a sense of flipping it in terms of looking. My mum and dad are optimists. They were always optimistic. I think that generation was optimistic. They came with a lot of hope. They came with a lot of belief and a lot of optimism about what they were coming to. That whole generation, I mean, the Windrush generation was like, people wanted to embrace, the idea that they could seek a new future in this country. And I think, there was it takes an optimistic person to do that. And I think from that point of view, they came with their hearts and their heads held high, and they wanted to experience something with a real sense of hope, and I think that's what came across more than anything.
So with that in mind, and I'm not wanting you to kind of second guess what your dad would have thought, but I am going to ask the blatant question. He passed away before this stuff that's triggering for you, and what he believed in and who he was before he passed away and went to another realm, whatever you believe. What do you think he'd think about Britain in 2019? Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, because I do kind of know, because in 2014, before everything kicked off with what we're going through right now, I kind of went on Channel 4 News, and I actually asked to go on after a certain election that happened, a by-election, and I said a lot of stuff about what dangers I felt there were, and you can see me online doing that, and I talked about the dangers of racism that were coming up and
bubbling at the time.
Yeah, were bubbling at the time, and I know that my dad had agreed with that before. I talked with him about that before. I mean, he'd already passed away a year before that, but I think I think because of those views, which I'd had for a very long time, and I was noticing a lot of stuff in the media. I think he agreed with a lot of views I had, and he like I said, I think he saw that as a gesture. It's interesting because Tagore, for example, Rabindranath Tagore gave back his knighthood to the British after the Amritsar massacre in 1919. There is a history of I know a lot of Asians who've actually felt that they couldn't really take that particular honour or their honours with ease because it felt uncomfortable for them for the reason that empire is associated with colonisation, and a lot of atrocities towards Indians happened during that time. So it feels very contradictory, and so it's uncomfortable. But on the other side of it, I'm very privileged in that I actually quite often get platforms to be able to say some of that stuff, and so but I think my dad was always proud. He was always supportive, as is my mum. So I think he would just be in that headspace.
All right, we'll stop for a couple of minutes now. Thank you for that.
Cool.
I want to play Nadia or Nadia, but I'll always call it Nadia.
Nadia.
Nadia. I just want to tell you my little relationship with this track. I've fallen in and out of love with it for years now. And the reason why it's been in and out of love has actually been quite shallow on my part. In love because I was a DJ at the time and I was like, yay, drum and bass beat, but with a beautiful vocal. It's everything Nitin does, but I can play it in a club. I can play it in the Blue Note. I can play it out at festivals. Then out of love. Well, actually, it's quite a simple composition. And Nitin's into much deeper stuff, and he's really, really intricate, and he's a maestro, and he's amazing. And then my other music kind of streams went off into whatever. Then I came back to it again. No, it's great for its simplicity. It's amazing. We don't need all this complicated stuff. And I don't know where I am right now, but I do know that I think I'm falling back in love with it again because it's a standout track on the album. And I know that 20 years later, the amount of people on social media who still talk about it. What's your relationship with this track?
Well, I'm very lucky in that it's interesting what you say because it's derived from a tumri, and tumri is actually quite a complex form in a lot of ways. But the beauty of if you look at the whole Indian classical rag system, harmonically there isn't much going on. Rhythmically, there's a lot going on, and also melodically, there's a lot going on because the Indian classical rag system is very complex. But you have rag desh, which is what this is derived from, and it depends on the intricacies. If you hear Nikki and Ashwin singing it together, I don't think you'd find it like simplistic, because what they're doing is they're getting into all those detailed microtones and shrutis and all the different kind of really small movements, the nuances of rag. And I think if you start listening to those, you'll hear that it's more than just a very simple kind of piece. But it's a repetitive piece. But some of my favorite pieces like Qawwalis are very repetitive. I don't feel that within Western classical compositions as well as popular music, there's a lot of repetition. You have motifs that come back a lot. But with Nadia, for me, it's an emotional refrain that comes back, and it sustains itself because it kind of feels like a powerful statement. And when you hear a powerful statement, I don't mind hearing it over and over again.
I just love the fact that you brought up microtones, nuances, melodies, actually broken down the different ragas and everything. Thank you, great Professor Sawhney, for that. Let's play it. Just to move this on now, I don't want to turn this into a sixth form debating society. But I am going to become the sixth form version of myself, because actually this is a really important question that I haven't really talked to you about at any point. And with you talking about your father and us talking about messages and the universe and synchronicity, where are you with religion and God?
Big one, that. I'm somebody who. So when I was a kid, right, this is what happened to me. I remember being in an RE class, religious education class at school. I was 11 years old, and I remember the RE teacher seeing me doodling on my pad. And I've come from a Hindu background, and I think of Hinduism as a great philosophy, and I look at it as a very beautiful thing, and I really have so much respect for Hinduism. Hinduism finds its way into so many ways in which I look at the world and the universe. I find modern physics actually reflects a lot of the things that I feel about Hinduism. So there I am in a Christian education class, and I remember the teacher had said all kinds of stuff, and I'd been half listening, but I was doodling. I liked the little drawing that I was doing, and he said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "Just drawing." And he said, "Well, have you, do you know it all then? Do you know everything that?" I said, "No, I don't. I don't know anything." And he said, "Well, have you got any questions for me if you don't know anything?" I said, "Yeah, I've got questions." And he said, "Okay, well, what are they?" And the first one was, I said to him, I said, "So, is God a racist?" And he said, "What?"
Wow.
And I said,
Nitin.
"Is God a racist?"
That's
because
the most Nitin Sawhney thing I've ever heard in my life.
And I'll say why I said it. Is I said, well, if the God that you're talking about, who knows everything, because you're saying Christ is the truth and the way, and that's the only way, then what about all the people in the Middle East who might be Muslim? Or what about all the people in India who are Hindu? Or what about all the people in Israel who are Jewish? Or what about the people in this, and I said all that. And I said, so does that mean that those people aren't favoured by God? And he said, well, the thing is, everyone's got free will. I said, so the free will of those people made them choose to, in your view, go to hell. So he said, what's your next question? My next question was, you said that God knows everything. And he said, yeah. I said, so why did he bother to make man before the flood? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, why did he not just start with Noah and all the animals and not just start, because he knew that he was going to kill everyone else. So why didn't he, before that, why didn't he just start there? And he said, well, he wanted to give a message to mankind. I said, he killed all those people to give a message. So as a kid, I was an obnoxious little kid, as you can probably hear. I was a precocious little kid who kind of wanted to. But what, in all seriousness, what I really feel is that everyone is entitled to their beliefs. Everyone should respect each other. Everyone should respect each other's belief system. As long as we do that, then I think we're okay. I mean, my feeling is that, like I said, I think of Hinduism as an incredible philosophy for me. I'm not into the idea of worshipping anybody or anything, but I am into the idea of always searching and trying to understand and feeling that I come from a place of humility and that I always want to try. I wouldn't ever believe that I know everything or know anything. All I know is that I'm trying to figure it out, and we're all on this same piece of rock together, and we're all trying to figure out what to do.
So how does that work with those messages from your dad? Like, do you believe there's a metaphysical afterlife and he exists in some carbon or non-carbon based form doing things, or are you literally like, too much to even think about right now? I remember my dad, and I'll deal with God after I die.
I have strong feelings about it. I think, from the Upanishads, the idea, the ancient Hindu scriptures, there's one idea that reality and dreams are interchangeable. And for me, in some ways, I kind of think we all live in our personal dreams. There are many quantum physicists who talk about that, people like David Deutsch. If you read the book Fabric of Reality, in the first chapter, he talks about the interchangeability of dreams and reality. There's lots of information about that. If you get into looking at the way science is going, Schrodinger's cat, Frauke-Renner experiment, the double slit experiments with photons, there's a lot of stuff that indicates that we're constantly scratching at the surface of what reality is. And I think for each of us, we have our own realities, and as long as we respect each other's realities, then I think we're fine.
Well, I think that's a great way to finish off a conversation which I definitely want to carry on, maybe not on air. I want to talk about quantum physics. I want to talk about atoms being in two places at the same time. I definitely want to talk about whether you call it dreams and reality, or even is this just a simulation. But I think for tonight, we must put an end to this right now before everyone's minds get too blown. And I just want to thank you for bringing your knowledge, your humor, your evident humor, and your completely open heart to this show. Thank you so much, Nitin.
Thanks, Bobby. Nice one.
If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and click the bell icon to keep up to date. For more great audio and video from the BBC, listen on Sounds, watch on iPlayer.